Hey folks, Matt Cuda here. Welcome back to Reviews from the Blind. Today, as promised, I have the Canon EOS R mirrorless camera. I just wanted to take, maybe just a few minutes here to do kind of an initial, my thoughts after, 2 days of photography with this camera. And does it make a good wildlife photography camera? Does it meet our expectations as wildlife photographers? And will it work as a wildlife photography camera? Let's get this out of the way right in the beginning. The answer is yes, it will work as a wildlife photography camera. However, there is this one caveat that I would like to say. I don't know if I would depend on this camera for birds in flight or any kind of fast action. I'm going to get more into that in a minute. But it was a fast focuser. It did pretty much do what I asked it to do, but there's a couple gotchas here. But before I get into all that, I just wanted to go over kind of my general feel of this camera. If you grip it here, you've got this grip, okay, very Canon-esque grip, if you will. You can see my hands fit the grip fairly well. No problems there per se. It is smaller than your traditional DSLR. Not a whole lot smaller than a Rebel. Maybe the same size as one of the smaller Rebels. But as far as comparing it to, say, a 1 Series or a 7D Mark II with a grip, no, it's just not gonna work. But however, it does feel good. It does feel good. Everything is solid on the camera. It has a typical Canon, rubberized wrap around the camera body itself. It's certainly good enough on that side of things, I think. It has the hot shoe mount on the top, just like any other DSLR would have. It has, and you're going to hear me use the word DSLR a lot here, because I think that's really what we're trying to compare it against as a Canon, typical Canon wildlife photographer. If I crack it open here, I got it mounted to my 150 to 600. If I take that off of here, just to show you real quick, I've got this mount on here, and this mount here in the front, this is I can take that off and show it to you. This mount here is the adapter to go from RF to EF, and no problems whatsoever with that. It worked very well. It drove my lens. It drove my 150 to 600 with little difficulty at all, which kind of surprised me, to be honest with you. I kind of thought it was going to be a difficult focuser. I just felt like it wasn't going to meet my needs as an autofocusing camera. The first day that I photographed with this was in very, very dark conditions, overcast, but highly overcast, deep overcast, if you will. And I felt like that this camera handled it fine. There's a couple of weird things with this camera as far as autofocus goes. Probably one of the most noticeable oddities about this camera is, I have it set up for back button focus, and as I was pushing the back to focus it, I noticed that what was happening was, it would, you would hear it doing its typical AI servo zip, 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 zip kind of thing as it moves back and forth in and out of focus. But it would, right as I depressed the shutter button, my first shot or two would be fine, and then it would throw itself back out of focus again. I have no idea why it was doing that. It made no sense whatsoever. But Oh, I took a picture there. Didn't mean to do that. As far as buttons on the outside of the camera, you know, if you're a Canon photographer, it'll be somewhat familiar to you, but they have kind of departed from what I would say is their traditional button setup. And if we turn it around here, let me see if I can do this while I'm looking into the camera here. If I turn this around, what you're gonna see is up here is your A lock, and then down here is your button to set your autofocus points, move them around on the screen. That was a little odd to me, the positioning here of this button. I had a hard time finding it. Now, if I were to use this camera every day, I don't think that would be a problem anymore. I honestly don't. It's just a matter of getting used to it. They got this little disc up on top. I don't know if I can get that so you can see it, but they got this little disc right here, and that acts as your kind of as your wheel would on the, you know, they have a big wheel right here on most DSLRs. Here it's got the little arrow button thing that I really despise on the Rebel cameras, and here it's unfortunately part of the camera. I have no idea why they did that. The video button's here on top. It's a little red button. I do like that. I think that's more out of the way and hard to easy to get to, but still hard enough to where you're not going to hit it by accident while you're trying to take still photographs, and that's good for us. Probably one of the biggest negatives of this camera, and it's not, well, I don't know if it's the biggest negative, it's a negative, is you have one SD slot. That's all, folks. One SD slot. It is easy to get to, easy to use. The battery is your typical Canon. Pops open right here. You can remove it. This takes the same battery as my 7D. It takes the LP E6N. I had to look at it so I didn't forget that crazy thing. So that's nice. If you have a 7D or a 5 series, then that's going to work for you. I did have one failure of the camera during a shoot. I was photographing out of this car in my blind here, and what ended up happening was there was a situation where the camera had gone to sleep. You know, because, you know, if you're waiting for birds, you know, it could be 15-20 minutes, and my little chickadees are just a chirping out there today. But you know how it is. I mean, you could have a 15-20 minute wait. This camera failed. It just stopped, and I literally could not get to turn back on until I removed the battery and put it back in. Now, any of you will know that that is basically a Canon reset, or a Canon reboot, if you will. To remove that battery, that's how they reset their cameras. That's kind of to be expected with a totally new line of cameras like this. I had a 7D, the original 7D Classic used to do that from time to time, and I despised it for doing that, but it is what it is. It wasn't a deal breaker per se, but it was annoying. See, what else can I say here? The, you know, typical USB and HDMI outs on the camera. They got rid of that dual. You know, if you had the 7D Mark II, you had that dual funky USB, which I always hated. Samsung used to use it as well, I believe, on some stuff. Hate that. It's harder to find them and so on. You got your mics. You got dual mics there. Or no, you got not dual mics. What am I thinking? You got a mic and a headphone. So that's nice for video. And I should say that I think this is a great video camera. Probably. That would be my just general consensus. Just after using it for a couple of days. I did do some video, and hopefully you'll see that as we're rolling here. Video turned out great on it. Very good focus. That's one thing that Canon is absolutely perfect on, is their focus with their video. It's just stunning that they do so well with it. Yeah, what can I say about that? The display. I wished all Canons had this. The display, ooh, look at that. Look at that vari-angle display. And, you know, the great thing about them is you can stow them like this so it doesn't get damaged. Whip it out. There you go, folks. If you're a vlogger, that's going to be nice, right? Very, very nice. If you're a nature photographer and you like to get low to the ground, doing those low shots of scenics, macros, look at that. I mean, you can't ask for anything better than that. Touchscreen viewfinder, which is frankly what every camera should be in today's world. Does what it's supposed to do. So what else did I notice about this camera? This is kind of weird. It's not just kind of weird, it's very weird. They actually created this camera to be an 8 frames per second camera. However, when you're an AI servo and you're on a situation like this where you're photographing birds or some kind of fast moving subject, it drops down to about 5 frames a second. So I suspect that that's not the way they wanted it to happen, but because of the engineering of this camera, I feel like that's just what happened. It was a unpleasant surprise with this camera, I think, for the engineering department. Now that I've got all that about it, what are the really positive aspects of this camera? What did I really like and I'm really excited about? First of all, I'm excited that Canon has finally got a serious competitor with this camera. Let's make no mistake about it. This is a competitor. This camera is not a bad camera. I would use this camera for, static wildlife, for backyard bird photography. Let's see, any kind of macro work would be amazing. This is a 30 megapixel camera, by the way. I forgot to mention that. That's a huge positive thing for me. You know, when I was shooting this thing yesterday, I got back and looked at the photographs, and I was like, wow, this is a good photograph, but I'm going to have to crop the heck out of this thing. And I cropped it way down, and it still looked great. I mean, at 30 megapixels, you can crop it in half. You can crop the final image in half and still have a 15 megapixel camera or shot. So that's pretty astounding. It is full frame. If I forgot to mention that too, I should have started out with this, right? There's going to be a specifications following this video. But the bottom line is that I would own this camera. Would it replace my 7D Mark II? Absolutely not. What it would do is it would fill in the gaps that I have currently on my on the scenic side of things, on the macro side of things. It's going to have a lot more resolution. It's going to have a lot more image quality. Is it worth the price tag? I mean, you be the judge on that. I personally wouldn't pay the whatever it is, $2,700 that Canon's asking for this. However, I do understand why it's priced high. It's priced high because this is their first foray into this. There's a lot of, we're paying for the research and development. All that stuff has to be paid for, and that's exactly why it costs so much money. I think in the coming years, you're going to see a price point on this camera. Probably, well, it might stay that way on this one. When they come out with the 7D version of this, essentially, I think what you're going to see is that camera is going to be more affordable in the $1,700-$1,800 range. I say more affordable. It's not going to be affordable. I don't think any photography equipment is particularly affordable. Even the batteries are ridiculous. Let's see, what else? Of course, with mirrorless, you get that whole preview effect. You know, when you're looking through your viewfinder, you're basically getting a simulation of what kind of, you're just seeing, not really even a simulation. I mean, you're seeing what the sensor is going to see, and it's just high quality. It's powerful. Man, there's birds all over out here today. Holy smoke, man. I've got finches all over, and there's chickadee. I got a chickadee building a nest over here. I mean, it is full-blown springtime here in North Carolina. I love it when it gets like this. I'm totally going off the rails here, but I just love it when it gets like that. You know, other than that, I can't think of anything in this intro segment that you really would want to know. I mean, it's a good first attempt by Canon. Let's just say that. It's a good first attempt. I'm looking forward to the pro version coming out later this year, hopefully. And I think, and I'll get a video out on that as well. Don't believe me, I'm not going to let that one go. And here comes the grackles to ruin everybody's vacation, right? Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'm going to get to shooting here in my studio, backyard bird studio, in my car blind. I brought these out because I thought I would share it with you. I have these gloves. Man, I can't even remember the name of them right now. Let's see if their name is on them. Let's see, Freehands. These are the Freehands photography gloves, and they're not particularly warm gloves, right? Which makes them good for this time of year. But what they do, and I'll put one on here for you. What they do, and of course they got these thumb hole and finger hole here so you can grab hold of your camera better. But what they really do well is birds. See this? See how that light's shining on there? All right, watch that. Okay. Now watch this. I'm going to put my hand up there. Look at that. See how my hand reflects like that? Birds can see that like nobody's business. Any animal can see that. And that's what they look for. They look for movement. Those birds right now, they're not doing a thing. I'm sitting here talking to you. They couldn't care less. Right? Now, if I were to raise my hand up and start shaking it like this out the window, they're going to freak. Right? And that's one of these things these gloves help. You can wrap your hands around your camera here like so, and see they all flew when I did that, right? Which, you know, they could see this hand for one thing. You can wrap your hands around it. Look how like much more invisible that is. I highly recommend a pair of tight, like tactical type gloves like this. I just thought I'd throw that in since I'm out here. Anyway, the other thing I thought I would throw in is, you know, you can put something like this on your head. This is one of these deals. I can't remember what they call the dumb things. Hunters use them all the time. I don't know. They're like a ninja mask, basically, is what they are. And that will cover up, you know, a lot of the, you know, the whiteness of my head here, right? You know, if I were to put that to my head, you can see that it's gonna, you know, basically cover that whiteness up. And that's another thing that the birds just hate that. You know, they hate to see that bright white skin. Look at that. Look at my hands right now. So that's just kind of an extra there, extra bonus. Anyway, I'm going to get to shooting, and I'm going to hand you off to me talking about specifications. Okay, let's talk about the specifications on this new camera, the EOS R. It has a lens mount of RF. Now, this is the new mirrorless lens mount. There's a lot of specifics about that lens mount that I'm not really going to get into here. I'll just say that it is a better mount than the EF. It allows for better image quality due to the lens itself being closer to the actual sensor. The lens quality, being able to have lenses that have wider apertures is easier to do. So there's a lot of reasons why. There's actually some white papers that Canon put out on the RF lens mount. So go ahead and check those out when you get some time. But in my case, I use the EF adapter, which is a separate item that you can purchase for anywhere from I think $100 is the cheapest one, and I think $199. I think it's $199 for the adapter with the ring on it. There's actually a programmable ring on one of the adapters where, let's say you want to make that the f-stop ring, like we used to have on the old lenses. You can easily program that to do that. So that's what that's for. The weight of this camera is 1.45 pounds or 660 grams. The sensor is a CMOS 30.3 megapixel full frame sensor. Has the standard file formats that we're familiar with, JPEG, RAW, MP4. ISO range is 100 to 40,000 or expanded from 50 ISO to 102,400. The shutter is electronic and mechanical, 30 seconds to 1/8,000th of a second. Now, with the latest firmware upgrade, you actually have a silent shutter option, which for bird photographers or just general wildlife is really an excellent thing to have, and it's one of the advantages of having the electronic shutter. It's an advantage that the Sony cameras, for example, have had over the EF, and so, or Canon cameras. Well, not just Canon cameras, but really any DSLR for that matter. It's very difficult to get a silent mechanical shutter, although I think Canon has done well to create a silent mode that, or I guess not really a silent mode, but my 7D Mark II has a much quieter shutter mode, and that doesn't bother the birds nearly as much. So it's not like it needs to be silent. It's not like your shutter needs to be silent, but the really big clunky shutters like are in the 1 series cameras and the 5Ds, they can scare things because they have quite a clunk to them, especially on the full frame cameras. Let's see here. The bit depth is 14-bit. Memory card format is SD or SDHC or SDXC. This is where I have a little bit of problem with the EOS R. I am not a huge SD fan. I like the bigger card formats like the CF or CF Fast, and the reason for that is really quite simple. One, they do achieve a slightly faster write speed, and they're easier to hold on to. So when you have gloved hands, or you're in the winter as a nature photographer, we're out in very cold weather sometimes, and being able to physically handle a card that's very small is not that easy. So for that reason, I'm not a big fan of the SD. It does not have dual card slots. That's another issue. I've already talked about that. Let's see. It doesn't have any IBIS or in-body image stabilization. Now, some of you are going to complain about that, and I understand. I mean, I would have liked to have seen IBIS in this body, but let's face it, most of the lenses that you own have image stabilization in them, and so it's not that big of a deal. It's just one of these things that, it's a nice to have. And, to be frank, at this price point, it's kind of something that you would expect from a modern mirrorless camera. It shoots up to 8 frames per second. Now, that's a little bit of a concern, because it really doesn't shoot at 8 frames per second. It shoots at 8 frames per second as long as you're not using the continuous servo mode, or what we used to call AI servo. Well, once you start using that, it drops down to 5 frames a second, or, who knows, maybe even less, I don't know. But, I did run into that. When I was shooting, it was shooting about 5 frames per second, and it was quite slow. Definitely not a fast action camera here, not something that you would want for photographing racing or sports or running deer or flying birds. This camera was just not designed for that. And if that's what you're looking for, then I would save your money. What kind of focusing modes? We talked about this a little bit. It has continuous servo AF, manual focus, of course, and single servo. So your continuous servo is like AI servo was on the DSLR. It just continuously focuses until it finds focus. As you hold down that shutter button halfway, or you use your back button focusing, it will continuously focus until you press the shutter button. It's what we've always had, okay? Manual, of course, I don't need to explain that. Single servo is just where it focuses one time, and let's just say your beep is turned on, for example. It'll focus and then beep, right, once it's in focus. But it doesn't continually focus. You can hold down your finger. It will not continuously focus. The viewfinder is 3,690,000 DPI. I did find the viewfinder to be useful. I didn't find it to be too dark or too light. The exposure simulation was very helpful with this camera. It was nice not to have to chimp once in a while to check your exposure. I really liked that. You could really get some precise exposures by using that simulation, and that's nothing new for Canon, right? We've had on the rear LCD, we've had exposure simulation in live view for a very long time, so that's not a big deal. But it still was very nice. And another reason that mirrorless is slowly becoming king, right, is because of features like this. Viewfinder coverage, of course, 100%. I wouldn't expect it to be less. The GPS has GPS, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all that good stuff is in there. And the price right now is about $2,200 to $2,300. Guys, I just have a hard time with that price on this camera. I'm not saying it's not worth it to some of you. Perhaps if all you're ever gonna do is photograph landscapes and macro and still lifes and things like that, I think this could be a fine bit of programming. I mean, it's a good camera. It does what it's supposed to do for the most part, but that price tag is just, I'd like to see that down to about $1,800. I think they're just hitting a little too high, just like Nikon did. I think Nikon tried to hit too high with theirs. You got to understand, I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here. I probably should wait till the end, but I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here, which is, Canon, you're coming into this game late, right? And I know you've got to get your ROI, right? You've got to pay for all the research and development. But think about it for a second. You're going up against Sony, who has got a huge foothold right now in this arena. And you're going to put out a camera that is, in my opinion, a little bit more, maybe a little spicier version of the 6D Mark II, in my opinion. And you're going to put a $2,200 price tag on that. And I think you need to rethink that a little bit. That's just my opinion. Maybe people are really paying that. I don't know. I'm not going to. I have no plans to purchase this camera. But anyway, that's pretty much it on the specifications. What I wanted to do next is I want to go into some photographs that I took, explain how I made it, and then, kind of in the end, just give you my general thoughts on this camera. Okay, so if you click, there's going to be a link in the YouTube video at the bottom where you can actually look at these photographs out on Flickr. They're going to be here in the video too, of course, but if you want, you can also go out there and look at them. It's a little easier. You'll get to see all of the statistics, like what lens and all that stuff. So that's going to be available. There's also a companion blog to this, which I'll also have in the show notes for this. So check those out as well. The first image here is one of my favorites, I guess, from the 2 days of testing of this camera. This is a dark-eyed Junco. He's perched on a plum branch, and we've got that beautiful spring bloom going on. And if you know anything about fruit trees, particularly, the fruit trees will generally bloom before anything else, and what you'll get is you won't have any leaves. There's no leaves on the trees at this point in time. So it's a good time to actually photograph birds up in the trees themselves. So this is not a setup shot. This is just birds stacked up in a fruit tree. So when I was taking these shots, I used Servo Mode. Okay, so that's continuous focus servo. And what would happen is, as I would focus on the bird, right? Let's say in this particular instance, I'm focused on his eye. And what would happen is, I would hold down, once I would get that, I would hold that button down like I'm used to doing on DSLRs. And it would lock in, and my first shot or two would be right. And then as I kept firing, it would go out of focus. It would just randomly go out of focus. And that is a bad thing, guys. I mean, you don't want that to happen, because if the bird were to move suddenly from that position, it would be out of focus. So that's a bad thing. And it's probably related, my guess is it's related possibly to one of two things. One, it's either the adapter, the EF to RF adapter, or it's the fact that I'm using a Sigma lens with it. And there's any number of possibilities there. I mean, I did have some Canon lenses I could have used with it, but I didn't have time. And besides that, I use the Sigma all the time, so I wanted to know, is this really going to work good with my Sigma? So this is again, a dark-eyed Junco, 531 millimeters with my Sigma 150 to 600, f6.3, 1/800th of a second at ISO 1000. Okay, the next shot. Okay, this is of a female cardinal. Same tree, different area of the tree. Here we have a vertical composition. By the way, having a 30 megapixel camera is really nice, because it really gives you a lot of cropping options. You can do a small crop, you can do a deep crop. I mean, think about it. You could crop the image in half and you still got 15 megapixels left over. So that is definitely a big pro with this camera. If I look at this image, I don't want to say it's maybe slightly better than my the 7D Mark II, but I looked side by side with some of the 7D Mark IIs that I had taken on a very similar day recently, and it was hard to tell which was which. After I got done processing them and all that, really not much difference there. And the great thing is my 7D Mark II is it's a crop sensor, so I'm able to back off more from the birds. I don't have to crop as much, so I'm getting a whole lot more resolution available to me actually with the APS-C camera. But very pleased with the image quality here. It's sharp to very sharp, I would say. This is actually, now here's I'm gonna get on my high horse here a little bit. You're gonna go out on the internet and you're gonna see some fairly well respected photographers, and they're gonna take the Sigma 150 to 600 and they're gonna go out with it and they're gonna say, you know what, it doesn't work at 600 millimeters. It's not sharp at 600 millimeters. Well, I got to tell you something, guys. This image right here was taken at 600 millimeters. I didn't manually focus it. It was autofocus. using, the newer mirrorless type focusing, which is different than having a separate AF sensor. And it's sharp as a tack, guys. Sharp as a tack. Where did they get this from that it's not sharp? This is actually at a fairly long distance. You're talking about at least, I'd have to look at the data, but I'd say at least 15 feet away on this. And it's as sharp as can be. Now, is it as sharp as a 400 2.8? Well, probably not, but it's certainly sharp enough and better than the images I see people taking. And don't forget, guys, one of the things about sharpness is it's part illusion, and a lot has to do with your sensor, frankly. How much anti-alias filtering it has versus ones that don't, how much sharpening you have to do in post, and so on. But I just don't see it. I mean, I don't see that it's a bad image. I don't see that it's out of focus that much, or it's not out of focus at all, but I don't see where the image quality is bad. But I don't know. I mean, I guess they're smarter than I am. But anyway, this is ISO 1250. One thing about ISO real quick, the ISO on this camera was decent, okay? Not nearly as good as the 1DX Mark II that I did a review on not long ago, but certainly acceptable. I could easily clean it up at 1600 ISO. My feeling is that once I got up around 6400, things would start to, fall apart. But that was just, I didn't actually shoot it that high. I didn't need to, so I didn't. But that's kind of my general feeling at this point. Okay, the next image I wanted to talk about is the squirrel image. Now, there's nothing fancy about a squirrel, right? They're in your backyard all the time. This guy made a good test subject because I wanted to test it on more of a furry critter versus a feathery critter. So he just happened to be there, and as you can well imagine, they're everywhere. And I thought I would use it. Now again here, I'm shooting at 600 millimeter with my 150 to 600. Now this is a true 600 millimeter. I cropped this, probably say maybe a 40% crop on this. Just so I made sure I got it nice and tight so you could see the focusing on it. And guys, it's tack sharp. Again, I don't know where this Sigma 150 to 600 doesn't focus well. It's a bunch of nonsense. I don't know where this whole thing started. My guess is that what people were doing is when you have a DSLR and you're in tight like this, if you don't calibrate your lens to your camera body, you're going to have issues, okay? And so if they were using DSLRs when they were testing and they never calibrated, that could account for some of the softness of the image. Here, you don't need to do a microfocus adjust because there's no difference between the AF. There is no secondary AF sensor. There's only one sensor. It goes out and gets focus. It knows what's in focus, right? So on this guy, again, it's at 600. I just said that. f6.3, 1/1600th of a second, ISO 1250. So we're getting up there in ISO on these guys. Okay, the last image I wanted to look at here, the reason I selected this image, this is another northern cardinal image. The reason I selected this image is because it kind of shows you some of the cool bokeh you can get with this camera. With this lens camera combination. And this is only at 388 millimeters. Had I taken this at 600 millimeters, it would have been really smooth and creamy in that background. But I just wanted to kind of show you kind of what that can look like with some nice flowers in the back and that sort of thing. This is another style of photography. Now, typically with my backyard birds, I'm doing some kind of setup work. And that involves setting perches up around feeders and so on and so forth. In this case, I'm taking more of a natural approach and just photographing whatever happens to land in this tree. And both are certainly valid approaches. And I just wanted to mention that in case, you're one of the people that are like, oh, I don't like setups, and I just wanted to show you, because I typically will show you setup shots, and then I just wanted to show you this is a non-setup, just whatever lighting was coming in, whatever perch they happened to land on, I photographed them. So just an aside there, totally another approach to bird photography. But that's about it. I mean, there's a couple other shots out there. We certainly have got a shot of a titmouse, American robin, all photographed with this setup. Now, what are my concluding thoughts? Where do I feel this camera fits in the wildlife photography and nature photography space in general? Okay, first let's talk about who I think this camera is for. This camera is for someone that wants a high resolution, fairly low noise, full frame sensor. So that could be a portrait photographer, that could be a landscape photographer, whether that be intimate landscapes or full-blown sweeping western landscapes, waterfall photography. Let's see. Macro photography, definitely a good fit there. I would definitely consider this for macro work. The articulating viewfinder on the back just makes it a great addition for doing intimate landscapes, macro work of mushrooms and flowers and things like that. Awesome for that. Let's see. Wildlife side, it could be used. As you can see, it can be used. I think as a supplemental camera, it would be effective. Maybe as a camera where you want something for backyard birds, to give you a little more resolution, to give you a little more punch in your images, give you a little, in my opinion, a little better color. I think the color on this sensor was really nice and really true to the actual color of the birds. Maybe you need a camera, if you're a full-blown nature photographer and you do wildlife, maybe this becomes your static subject zoo / landscape camera. It does have a place, guys. It really does. It does have a place in your kit. It's just that if you only could pick one camera for wildlife and nature, I personally would not pick this camera. It just doesn't have all of the boxes checked to be a good wildlife camera. Will it get the job done in some cases? Yes, absolutely. As you can see, it does. And that's why I wanted to review it, because I had a feeling, that's one of the biggest reasons I wanted to review this, is I had a feeling that it was going to be a good camera to fit certain niche, whatever you want to call it, areas of nature photography. I just don't feel like it's a hardcore wildlife photography camera. If you are wanting something that's less price, I would probably steer you toward the 6D Mark II. Having said that, I've never photographed with the 6D Mark II. I'm going to be doing a review on that fairly soon, I think, because I've actually considered myself adding a full frame camera to my arsenal. I haven't needed one yet because I've mainly just been doing wildlife for all these years, aside from a few landscapes and a few waterfall shots and water shots and things like that. So I'm considering it too, and maybe that 6D Mark II would fit that niche a little bit better, and you can probably get one used as well. But my final thought is this. My final thought I want to give to you is this. First of all, I just want to thank Canon for finally stepping up to the big boy world of mirrorless, because mirrorless is the next greatest thing. It's the next evolution, guys. It really is. I love my DSLRs. Don't get me wrong. They've served me well and will continue to serve me well. And it's probably still going to be a couple more years before you see me move to a mirrorless system. But what I see here is I see a great first attempt at an advanced amateur / professional style camera. Okay. There is another one coming out. It's going to be more professional. We know it's coming. There's probably going to be an APS-C camera on the horizon. I'm sure it's already in the secret pipeline that Canon has. We're going to see these cameras, guys. They're going to start coming out. I will do reviews on them as I can. Oftentimes these cameras are hard to get a hold of for the first year, so that's why this one's a little bit late. Looking forward, I see also some reviews coming on some lenses. Probably going to do a review on some of the lower end Canon lenses, just to give you an idea of what they look like and what you can do with those. But lots of good stuff coming. Thanks for listening and watching. Make it a great day and get out there and enjoy nature. Bye-bye.